John grew up in the church. As far back as he could remember, his parents always had him in church. He had given his life to the Lord at around 5 years old. He was always active in children's ministry, and as he got older, he was always active in the teen ministry and even took on a leadership role in the teen ministry as he progressed into his senior high years. See, his whole life was centered around his faith. It was while he was in the youth group that he met a man named Tim. And Tim was the new youth leader, and they hit it off right away. Tim was very close. Tim and John were very close, and their relationship evolved into more of a big brother, little brother type of relationship. A year or so later, Tim went off to Nazarene Bible College in Colorado to pursue his degree and his call into ministry. After a few more years, John had graduated high school and was serving as a leader in the youth ministry now himself. And he was shocked to see that Tim had returned home from Bible college early before finishing his degree. But their friendship picked up right where it had left off, and they had become even closer than ever before. They were practically inseparable over the next few years. They were the closest of brothers. Then some news came to light about Tim and some struggles he had had while he was away at Bible college. And those struggles had followed him back home. Tim knew that these struggles needed to be dealt with and was willing to do whatever it took to deal with them. Tim had confessed his struggles to John, and John let Tim know that there was Tim know that there was nothing that he wouldn't do to help Tim get through the struggles that he was facing, because they were like brothers and he was family. After a week or so, Tim had decided that he didn't want to deal with what he was struggling with. And he decided to run from it and run from everyone in his life. John tried reaching out to Tim in many ways, but Tim refused to answer him. Because of what Tim had done, he was going to be in trouble with the law. And because Tim confessed what he had done to John, John was forced to tell what Tim had told him to the police. On his way home from the police station, John had to drive by Tim's house and decided to stop by and try once more just to talk with Tim. Tim's car was there at his apartment, and when John pulled up, with his heart beating out of his chest, John knocked on Tim's door. He could hear Tim on the inside, on the other side of the door, and John called out to him. He called out to Tim to answer the door, that he just wanted to talk. But he didn't receive an answer. He started begging Tim to just open the door and talk as tears streamed down his face. John cried out how they were brothers and they could get through this no matter what. It wasn't too late. The minutes that John was outside Tim's door calling for him felt like an eternity. Tim never answered the door that day, and John never saw or heard from Tim again. Over the next few weeks, that hurt and the anger raged through John. It eventually subsided a little bit on the outside. But John would never be able to forgive Tim, his brother, how he threw their friendship and their brotherhood away without even a goodbye. Over the next several months, John continued on with his life and his service with the youth ministry, and things got back to being a bit normal. And anytime, though, that John heard or thought of Tim, that hurt and that anger would always start to build up and work its way to the top. It was shortly after John was approached by another local pastor in the area who was close friends with his own pastor. And he wanted to know if he was willing to serve in a ministry that he was running that helped addicts recover and get back on their feet. They had talked about what was expected of John, and John agreed to help and serve there. And about 6 weeks later, the expectations of that new ministry were not what was discussed, and they weren't what were required. and they required a lot more of Tim's time and effort than he had agreed to. John called the other pastor and informed him that he was going to be stepping down from that ministry and explained to him the reasons why. It wasn't long after that John's own pastor had given him a call and asked him to speak with him in his office. John met his pastor, and his pastor asked him why he was stepping down from the recovery ministry. He informed him how the requirements were not what were agreed upon and how he was going to pull him away from the ministries that he was a part of at his own church and that he knew he was called to. John's pastor then informed him that if he was going to step down from the recovery ministry, that he wasn't following God's plan for his life, and John was no longer allowed to serve in any ministries at the church whatsoever. And all he was allowed to do was to walk in the door and sit in the pew on Sunday morning until he was willing to acknowledge what God had planned for his life. John couldn't believe what he was hearing from his pastor, a man he had known for 10 years and he had respected. It broke his heart. He had given his whole life to the church and his faith, and now his pastor was betraying him. The hurt and anger raged through John for how he was mistreated by his pastor. John couldn't and wouldn't forgive him for what he did. He was also angry at God for allowing such things to even happen to him. John left his church. And not only that, he left his faith as well. He still believed in God, but he had no desire to follow one who allowed these things to happen to him. John couldn't and wouldn't forgive his pastor and Tim for what they did to him. And this hurt and this anger and this unforgiveness ate away at John. His life started to spiral slowly. He turned to different vices to mask his pain. It started to affect his relationships with his family, his friends, his romantic relationships, his work, every aspect of his life, really. He eventually tried going back to church a few times over the next several years, as he knew it wasn't really God's fault for what happened, but every time he tried to go back, it never really stuck, because that hurt and anger and unforgiveness that John was willing to let go of kept getting in the way. It took John 10 years to finally understand. He needed to forgive those who had hurt him so badly. He wrote out a list of all those who had hurt him and that he wouldn't forgive, and one by one, he started forgiving them and let them go. Shortly after this, John had rededicated his life to God and gave himself completely over to Him. He had found a new church home with wonderful people and 2 great pastors. John fully stepped into the call that God had placed on his life to be a pastor. And he's recommended to be ordained in just a few short weeks. If you haven't figured out by now, John is me. And this is my story. Unforgiveness destroyed my life for 10 years. It kept me away from God. And it wasn't until I was willing to let go that He was able to come back into my life and to do some miraculous things in me. Don't let unforgiveness stand between you and God. I'm telling you right now, there is nothing that anybody has ever done to you that is worth going to hell over. These altars are open. I'm going to ask you to come play. If God is speaking to you in your life right now about some unforgiveness that you have, I'm going to ask that you come down to the altars and let it go. If you're at home online watching and God is speaking to you about some unforgiveness that you have in your life, I'm asking that you would just turn where you are and kneel at your couch, at your chair, wherever you may be listening, and let it go. It's just not worth it. I don't want to see unforgiveness wreak havoc on your life like it did mine. Please don't wait another second and come